If you enjoy cinematic stories about ancient history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next episode. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think, or suggest a battle or historical figure you want to hear about in future videos. Your likes, comments, and shares are the greatest support for this channel and help it keep growing. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into today's story. Dawn rose slowly over the fields near Plataea, a pale light stretching across the hills, as if the sky itself was hesitating, unsure of what this day would become. Mist drifted low to the ground, brushing against bronze shields and leather armor. Rows of Greek soldiers stood silently, steadying their breathing, gripping the handles of their spears. For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. They knew that what waited beyond that mist was not just another battle. It was a turning point, one that could reshape the future of an entire continent. Far off in the distance, faint echoes drifted from the Persian camp. Metal clanked, horses snorted. Orders were shouted in unfamiliar tongues. It was a reminder that this was not a simple clash of armies. It was a confrontation between a massive empire stretching across 3 continents and a collection of small, often quarrelsome city-states fighting for something far more personal than territory, the right to remain free. To understand why Plataea mattered so deeply, we need to look back. For years, the Persian Empire had pressed westward, its influence expanding across the known world. Under powerful kings, their armies marched across lands from Egypt to the edges of India. When they turned their attention to Greece, many believed resistance was hopeless. The Persians were too many, too wealthy, too vast. They had already burned Athens, forcing its people to flee their homes and watch their city fall to ashes. But the Greeks had refused to yield. They had stood at Marathon. They had held the mountain pass at Thermopylae. Their ships had fought through smoke and shattered wood at Salamis. Each victory had bought time to gather allies, time to rebuild hope, but the threat was still looming. The Persians wanted a final blow, and the man chosen to deliver it was Mardonius. Mardonius was confident, ambitious, and determined. He believed that Greece could be conquered if he struck with precision. While the Persian king returned home, Mardonius stayed behind with a powerful force ready to force Greece into submission. He saw the divisions between the city-states, the rivalries that had lasted generations, and he believed he could use them to break the Greek resistance once and for all. Opposing him were leaders who had every reason to distrust one another, yet every reason to fight side by side. There was Pausanias of Sparta, known for discipline and unshakable resolve, carrying the weight of his city's proud military tradition. And there was Aristides of Athens, a man respected for his integrity, who had seen Athens destroyed and understood that retreat was no longer an option. Their cities had clashed many times in the past, but now their futures were intertwined. The threat standing before them was too great for rivalry. As their armies gathered near Plataea, there was no certainty, only determination. Pausanias walked among the Spartan lines, speaking quietly to his soldiers. He reminded them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Aristides moved through the Athenian camp, watching men sharpen spears and whisper prayers for families left behind. Many had lost their homes, some had nothing left except the will to fight. For American listeners today, imagine a moment when everything familiar, your community, your principles, your sense of identity is at stake. That is what these soldiers felt. Plataea was not abstract politics or distant ambition. It was personal. If they failed, their world would be reshaped by a foreign power that did not share their values, their customs, or their vision of what life should be. As the sun climbed higher and the fog slowly thinned, both sides prepared themselves for what was coming. No one knew which side would emerge victorious. But every man present understood one thing clearly: when this day ended, history itself would take a new direction. Yet even as the sun rose higher over the fields of Plataea, the uneasy balance between the two armies refused to break. What unfolded in the days that followed was not a glorious charge or a swift clash of steel, but a long, grinding standoff that tested the nerves and endurance of every soldier on the field. The Greeks held the higher ground along the foothills scattered across ridges and rocky paths. From up there, they could see the vast Persian camp stretched across the plain tents, banners, endless supplies, shimmering armor, and the unmistakable movement of thousands of horses. The Persians favored the flat land, for it was the perfect stage for their most feared advantage, their cavalry. Day after day, the Persians pushed forward with quick probing attacks. Their horsemen swept across the plain with astonishing speed, riding close enough to shower the Greek lines with arrows before turning back again. Hooves thundered like distant storms, and clouds of dust rose behind them as they retreated. The Greeks had seen cavalry before, but not like this, not with this precision, this confidence, this ability to strike and vanish. Among the Persian riders was a man whose presence could shift the momentum of an entire engagement, Mecistius. He was a celebrated commander known for his skill on horseback and his striking armor that gleamed like polished gold. His riders believed he could not fall. The Greeks believed he would be the spearhead of any major Persian assault, and so the standoff continued. Each day felt heavier than the last. Supplies grew harder to distribute. Water sources were threatened. The air was thick with tension, as if the earth itself sensed the weight of what was coming. Greek soldiers tried to rest at night, but often found themselves staring into the darkness, wondering how long their strength and their luck would last. Still, they did not despair. Weariness crept into their bones, but it did not break them. The Spartans were trained to endure far worse. The Athenians, though, exhausted from years of war, carried the memory of their burned city with them like a flame in their chests. And the men from smaller towns, Megara, Tegea, Corinth, fought with the knowledge that their homes too stood in the path of the Persian advance. It was during one of these tense days that the first real spark ignited. A unit from Megara had been positioned on a vulnerable stretch of land exposed to the Persian cavalry. As the morning sun climbed, Mecistius led a powerful charge directly toward them. The sound of galloping hooves grew louder and louder until it felt like the earth was shaking beneath the Greeks' feet. Spears rattled, shields tightened. The Megarians braced themselves, but they were dangerously outmatched. "We need support," a Megarian officer shouted, his voice carrying up the hillside. Athens was closest. Without hesitation, Aristides ordered Athenian hoplites to advance. Their bronze armor caught the light as they rushed down to reinforce the exposed line. The clash unfolded quickly, dust swirling, arrows streaking through the air, Persian riders maneuvering with practiced ease. In the middle of the chaos, Mecistius rode at the front, urging his horse forward. He struck with calm precision, moving with the confidence of someone who believed victory was inevitable. But fate turned in a single moment. An Athenian spear hit Mecistius's horse, and the great animal collapsed beneath him. The fall stunned the Persian commander long enough for Greek soldiers to close in around him. Even with his impressive armor, he could not escape. The Persians watched in disbelief as their revered leader failed to rise. When the news spread through the Persian camp, grief erupted like a wave. Riders dismounted and mourned openly. His men saw him as more than a commander, he was a symbol of their pride. For the Greeks, the moment felt like a sudden shift in the wind. Standing on those rocky slopes, watching the Persians retreat with Mecistius's body, they felt something they had not felt since arriving at Plataea: hope. But even with that glimmer of hope, following Mecistius's fall, the pressure on the Greek lines only intensified. The Persians adjusted quickly, renewing their harassment, pushing their cavalry harder, and targeting the most vital resource the Greeks depended on: water. Within days, the Persian riders managed to disrupt access to the main spring that fed the Greek position. Water pots returned half full. Some returned empty. Men whispered about thirst creeping into their throats during the long afternoons, the kind of dryness that made their minds wander and their patience thin. The hope born from Mecistius's death was real, but it was fragile. Eventually, the Greek commanders agreed they needed to reposition their army closer to Plataea itself, where water and supplies could be more reliable. The plan was simple enough, but it depended on one thing: moving thousands of men in the middle of the night without alerting a watchful enemy. That night, a quiet unease settled over the Greek camp. Torches were extinguished one by one. Orders were spoken softly past from soldier to soldier like a secret no one wanted the Persians to overhear. And in the midst of this darkness stood a young Athenian hoplite named Thestor, whose perspective offers a glimpse into what that night felt like for the ordinary men, forced to carry the weight of history on their shoulders. Thestor tightened the straps of his shield and whispered a quick prayer. He knew the plan: keep formation, move silently, stay close to the ridge. Yet, as the column began to shift, the natural confusion of nighttime movement took over. Units drifted apart. Some moved earlier than intended, others later. Pathways that seemed clear by daylight now felt unfamiliar, twisting through darkness, where every rock looked like a shadow, and every shadow felt like danger. "We are drifting," one soldier murmured beside him. Thestor felt it too. The line in front of him stretched thin, the line behind him faded into the dark. Step by step, the cohesion of the Greek army slowly unraveled. A message intended for one unit reached another. A few groups halted, unsure of their direction. Others forged ahead too quickly. In the distance, an owl cried out, and Thestor felt the sound echo in his chest. Still, he kept moving. Every soldier did. They had no choice. But the night that was supposed to be a silent withdrawal began to look like a staggered retreat. By dawn, the first rays of sunlight revealed exactly what the Greeks feared: most scattered formations across the hills. Some units had already reached the new position, others were still on the move. Others, like the Spartans under Pausanias, were stranded closer to the front line than anyone intended. And on the other side of the plain, Mardonius saw everything. From the Persian camp, the shifting Greek lines appeared not like a coordinated repositioning, but like disorder, like panic. It was the moment he had been waiting for. To him, the Greeks looked as though they were fleeing, and a fleeing enemy was an invitation. "Muster the men," Mardonius said firmly. "We strike now." Back on the Greek side, Pausanias scanned the terrain, his jaw tightening, as he realized his position. His Spartan warriors were exposed, pinned between the advancing Persians and the unfinished Greek withdrawal. One officer approached him quickly. "They are coming," he said. "The Persians are advancing in force." Pausanias nodded once, steadying himself. He knew he couldn't pull back. There was no time. The Spartans would have to hold. Whatever happened next would be decided here on this ground. Thestor, still in the Athenian ranks, struggling to regroup, could see dust rising across the plain. He felt the shift in the air. The Persians were not waiting anymore. The Battle of Plataea was no longer approaching. It had begun. And as the dust rose across the plain, rolling like a wave toward the scattered Greek lines, it became clear that the Persians were charging with full force. The moment of hesitation was gone. The day had arrived, and fate was marching with it. Pausanias and the Spartans stood near the small, weathered Temple of Demeter, a quiet sanctuary that now found itself at the center of a historic clash. The sun had barely lifted above the horizon, but already shadows stretched long and sharp over the plain as Persian infantry and cavalry advanced in a massive sweep. Shields glimmered, spears rose. Voices carried across the field. The first sound that reached the Greek ranks was the sharp hiss of arrows. A rain of missiles fell from the Persian lines, the sky darkening for a brief moment as if a cloud had passed over the Sunday. The arrows struck shields, armor, and the ground with rapid, relentless impacts. Spartans raised their shields with disciplined precision, forming layers of protection, but they could still feel the thud of each strike. Pausanias looked upward then toward the distant hills, hoping to see the other Greek forces closing in. But they were still too far. "Hold the line," Pausanias called out his voice, firm but controlled. At his side stood veteran warriors from Sparta and Tegea, men who had trained their entire lives for moments like this, moments when they would be outnumbered, exposed, and yet expected to stand firm. They braced themselves, gripping their shields tighter, waiting for the next wave. It arrived quickly. Persian infantry surged forward, moving with speed and confidence, their shields raised and their shouts echoing across the field. They relied on mobility, on numbers, on overwhelming pressure. The Spartans anchored near the temple understood that the Persians intended to break them before the rest of the Greek army could regroup. Thestor, still making his way from the Athenian position, could see the clash from a distance. The morning sun lit the edges of helmets and shields, turning the scene into something both beautiful and terrifying. And through the chaos, he heard the call that made every Greek heart seize with anticipation. "Advance!" The Spartans lowered their spears as Pausanias gave the long-awaited order. What had been a defensive shell now rolled forward, like a living wall. Step by step, shield to shield, they pushed into the advancing Persians. The impact was thunderous. The front lines shook under the collision of disciplined Greek formations and the swift momentum of the Persian infantry. It was not wild or chaotic, it was controlled intensity. Every Spartan step was deliberate. Every Persian movement was agile. The air was filled with the rhythm of battle, the shouts of officers, the clatter of shields, the pounding of feet against the earth. Near the temple where the ground dipped slightly, the Persians concentrated their efforts, believing they could break through the Spartan center. And among them, riding close to the front, was Mardonius. He wore his distinctive armor reflecting the sun with a brilliance that made him unmistakable. His presence was meant to inspire confidence, to remind his troops of the power of the empire behind them, but it also made him a target. Greek momentum grew as the Spartans pressed harder. Mardonius rode closer, directing his men, urging them to push back. For a moment, it seemed like the Persians might stabilize their line. Then came a shift. A group of Spartan warriors pressing against the Persian flank created a sudden imbalance. The Persian infantry recoiled just slightly, just enough to disrupt their timing. In a battle as tense as this, a moment's hesitation was all it took. Amid the movement, Mardonius was unseated. The fall was not dramatic or violent, but it carried the weight of a turning tide. When Persian soldiers saw their commander fall, uncertainty rippled through their ranks. That uncertainty became fear. And fear in an army that depended on cohesion became collapse. The Persians began to retreat. First, slowly, then rapidly. The Spartans pressed forward, breaking through the weakened lines, moving toward the Persian camp. Thestor and the Athenians finally arrived, joining the surge, helping encircle the remaining forces. Within hours, the massive Persian camp fell to Greek hands. The empire that had marched across continents now saw its greatest invasion unravel in a single morning. And when the dust of the morning finally settled, the plain of Plataea no longer looked like the battlefield it had been just hours earlier. The cries of war had faded into the distant echo of retreat. Greek shields rested against the earth. Tired men leaned on their spears, catching their breath as the full weight of what they had accomplished slowly began to sink in. The Persians were defeated. Not pushed back, not delayed, defeated. The massive invasion force that had crossed land and sea to subdue Greece had all but collapsed. The survivors fled northward, abandoning the once confident Persian camp. And for the first time in years, the Greeks could look across a battlefield and know that the threat of conquest had finally lifted. Word spread quickly, carried from unit to unit like a spark through dry grass. The invasion was over. For Thestor, the young Athenian who had survived the march, the thirst, the confusion of the night, and the violent morning clash, the victory did not feel loud or triumphant. Instead, it felt quiet, like a long exhale after holding his breath for far too long. He looked toward the ruins of the Persian camp, then toward the distant hills where Athens lay. The thought that he could return home someday, rebuild, and live freely again felt almost unreal. The Greeks did not let this moment pass without marking it. In the years that followed, they created a monument to honor the unity that had saved them. It took the form of a bronze column, beautiful, tall, and twisting, like three great serpents rising together from the earth. Today, it is known as the Serpent Column. Inscribed on it were the names of the Greek cities that had fought side by side at Plataea, each name a reminder that these communities, often rivals, had stood as one against a force far greater than any of them alone. That column became a symbol of unity overcoming division, of determination, defeating overwhelming odds. It stood not just as a memorial to a battle, but as a testament to the values that had carried the Greeks through their darkest hour. And the impact of that unity reached far beyond the battlefield. The victory at Plataea allowed Greece to step into a new era, one of rebuilding creativity and political experimentation. In the decades that followed, Athens would rise to become a center of philosophy, theater, art, and the early foundations of democratic thought. The ideas forged during this era would ripple outward across centuries, shaping the conversations of scholars, leaders, and thinkers across the Western world. For American listeners, that influence is closer than it might seem. Concepts like Civic responsibility, public debate, individual liberty, and the belief that ordinary people can help shape their own future, all of these ideas trace part of their lineage back to the world that emerged after battles like Plataea. And that brings us to the heart of the story. Plataea is not just about armies or strategies. It is about people standing firm when everything around them seemed hopeless. It is about unity in moments when disagreement would have been easier. It is about ordinary individuals, farmers, craftsmen, citizens choosing to protect the ideals they believed in even when the cost was high. It invites a question not just of history but of ourselves. What do we stand for when the moment comes? Every generation faces its own turning points, not always on battlefields but in the choices we make, the values we defend, and the communities we build. Plataea reminds us that courage is not reserved for heroes in armor. Sometimes it belongs to people who simply refuse to let fear decide their future. As we close this story, take a moment to reflect. If this battle moved you, share your thoughts below. Which moments in history do you feel shaped the world you live in today? And what moments in your own life have required you to stand your ground? If you enjoyed this journey through time, consider subscribing for more stories told with depth, humanity, and a sense of connection to our modern world. Because history